Now, Nigeria's story, some argue, has been written less by the ballot and democracy and more by the gun. In a new book titled The Gun Hegemony, veteran activist and politician Ayo Opadokun makes a bold claim that Nigeria's modern history has been shaped by force and that the failure to defend constitutional order after the 1966 military coup set this country on the path of prolonged military dominance, with consequences Nigerians are still living with today. The book revisits the coup, the choices that followed it, and the price Nigeria paid, politically, economically, and morally, for allowing power to slip from the rule of law to the barrel of a gun. Launched this week to coincide with January the 15th, the 60th anniversary of that 1966 coup, and endorsed by some of Nigeria's most prominent figures, The Gun Hegemony is not just a history book, it's a warning. And it argues that when Nigeria failed to defend the constitution in 1966, force became normalized, institutions weakened, and violence was legitimized as a political tool. Today's insecurity, terrorism, banditry, and the erosion of public trust may not be a coincidence, but a consequence. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from Lagos by the author, veteran activist, and General Secretary of the National Democratic Coalition, Chief Ayo Opadokun. Chief Opadokun, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You argue that Nigeria's story has been written less by the ballot and more by the gun. At what moment, in your view, did the gun decisively overtake the ballot? And was that moment inevitable?
Thank you, Charles. The story of the country called Nigeria, first of all, I put this for the often time. Nigeria is a creation of the gun. If gun was not discovered by the Chinese between the 9th and the 12th century, and after it got into the Middle East and Europe in the 13th to the 15th century, and the Europeans then developed the inordinate ambition for colonialism and then discovered North America, Asian countries, and Africa. And they came with the superiority of their gunpower to ravage, to ridicule, to tyrannize, to blackmail, to kill, and then eliminate Nigerian natives, over 350 ethnic nationalities. So the gun had been here. It was through the superiority of the gunpower that the place they amalgamated in 1914 was created. That is the first thing. The second is that the military could only tolerate civilian administration, which was working relatively reasonably. Between 1960 and 1966, they could only tolerate the civilian administration for just 5 years plus. And since they intervened, at their first coming, they spent 13 years. In their second coming, they spent 15 years. So in military uniform, they spent 28 years. And when we, the activists, put pressure on them to force them to go to the barracks, they imposed their former military commander-in-chief upon us in the name of General Obasanjo, who spent 8 years, and General Buhari, who spent another 8 years. 8 years plus 8 years, 16 years plus 28 means 44 years. And I just remind Nigerians again that when the army took over on 15th of January 1966, Alhaji Aliyu Shehu Shagari was the Minister of Works. But it was unto him they handed over power in 1979. General Obasanjo knew that President Umaru Yar'Adua was challenged medically. Yet, he forced him on the country and brought a relatively innocent person who was just coming from the classroom and trying to govern a Bayelsa state to come and be his running mate.
Right.
So that is to say that even the civilians who were in the interregnum were chosen by the military.
Okay,
And for about 13 years.
Right.
13 plus 44 with 57 years out of 66 years post-independence of Nigeria.
I think you.
So that is why the army, the gun, has.
Right. I think you made that point.
I've stopped because.
Right. I think you made that point quite eloquently and in a very arresting way. Hence the title of your book, The Gun Hegemony, and that suggests dominance, not interruption. So in effect, you're saying that military influence never truly ended in Nigeria, even after the return to civilian rule.
It couldn't have been, because while they were in that prolonged military dictatorship, they installed their minions, their surrogates, their confederates, their loyalists, their sympathizers to man all the major public institutions of Nigeria till tomorrow.
And
who is a rich man today in Nigeria?
Right. And from what I've read, go on, finish your thought.
Yes.
Finish your thought.
If he was not a military man, he must have been made by the military. The so-called Nigerians who emerged in the what they call the names Forbes Club of Millionaires, and they make their money.
That's a good question, and I suspect that a lot of Nigerians will be inclining towards the points that you're making. But I mean, in your book, you place significant weight on the failure to defend constitutional order after the 1966 coup. I mean, who specifically failed Nigeria at that moment? The political elite, the military, or the citizenry?
Well, when the coup took place, it was clear that there was ethnic coloration, because Emmanuel Ifajuna, who took the challenge to operate in Lagos, was asked who was going to operate in the East and in Asaba, in the Midwest. He told his colleagues that he was going to handle that. He never did. Ironsi, from the police intelligence reports, equally was to be eliminated. So it was a blatant lie to say that he was just, he escaped them. He never did. So, what I'm saying here, therefore, is that when they came back to Lagos, when Agu Ironsi succeeded in talking them over, and Nzogu was brought here to Lagos, and they found out that what happened was only in the north and in the west. Nzogu lamented that this thing had been compromised. Captain Nwabosi collaborated that really there was ethnic coloration in the matter. And that was the crisis of our land till tomorrow. Because even after that, the president of the Senate, Nwafọ should have sworn in Alhaji Buba Galadima, who was the most senior minister. He refused to do so. It was clear from all the police intelligence reports that he preferred Sir Mbadiwe to take over rather than Galadima. And so the Igbo caucus of the cabinet were meeting in his own house, while the others were meeting in Buba Galadima's house. And they just told them to go back home. They will be called. And at the end of the day, Irosi just called the cabinet and told them that the army was strongly persuaded that they should take over. They should either accept before they got out of that place, or something else will happen. And what happened finally? What that was that there was no minute of that thing until Alhaji Abdulrazak got one ordinary rough sheet of paper to write it down, and then in the evening they were told one for this will go to make a broadcast. He made the broadcast, and immediately thereafter Irosi claimed that the power had been handed over to him by civilians. Akinjide book cleared that it was a false narration. Also, Alhaji Sheikh Shagari's book also declared very strongly that it was a false narration. They never handed over power voluntarily. They were coerced into doing so.
Right. Well, let me come in here, because I mean there are obviously different versions of what happened on that during that period. This is your version. I mean, there are people who see it from a completely different perspective.
Charles.
But I have to move on. Sorry. Yeah.
Charles.
Yes. Go ahead. Make your point.
Charles, don't be befuddle this matter. None of them really could challenge the most reliable, credible police intelligence report. This is not my version. Opadokun never created that version.
Right, okay. Well, let me move on here and ask you, because some historians argue that the coup was a symptom, not the cause of Nigeria's political breakdown. How does your book respond to that argument?
Repeat your question again.
I said some historians argue that the coup was a symptom, not the cause of Nigeria's political breakdown. How does your book respond to that argument?
Well, my reaction, first of all, is to say that most of the so-called books you are talking about, even written by most of our so-called historians, behave typically to copycat the British historians who wrote about Nigeria. They never had access to the new information that were available. For example, of all the books, of all the things that you have read about that book, nobody had ever linked Major Ojukwu with that coup. Nobody had never done that. And I'm saying to you that after the 1964 election failed, he went to Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe to give him political support to stage a coup in 1964. And because Dr. Azikiwe refused his offer, he went to General Gawan. General Gawan is still alive, who was his classmate. And Gawan told him that he was going to report him to the British commander. And he did. And they were invited. And they warned that they will keep surveillance over them. There are sufficient police intelligence reports that he was the one who influenced Imanu Ifejuna to lead that uprising. And they met in his official Apapa residence for over a number of times.
Right.
Before they even called Nzogu into the matter.
Right. Can I kind of bring you back to the context of your book, which is really what the focus of this discussion is? I mean, you ask whether Nigeria has escaped military rule or merely changed the uniform of power. In today's Nigeria, where exactly do you see the logic of force still operating?
Very much wide. Because the military had arrested everything about us, inclusive of our politics. They did not allow for popularization of the culture, features, democratization generally. They quickly, for selfish reasons, claimed that civilians were corrupt, they were doing things contrary to public norm. And they seized power. They turned out to be worse mercenaries than the civilians. In the process, what has happened over the years is that because they abrogated, suspended the negotiated federal constitution and substituted for it their decrees 1 to 9, which centralized and unitarized Nigeria. The public policy had become so much of unfair play, inequity, injustice, near total disregard and respect for the rule of law.
Right.
And that is what has brought us into where we are today.
Let me come in here, Chief, because we're almost out of time. If the gun still casts a shadow over politics, as you say that it does, what does that mean for the credibility of the elections and democratic accountability today? I mean, can a democracy truly function when coercion, whether through security agencies or informal force, remains an effective political tool?
Well, Charles, we should not deceive ourselves. I'm repeating myself to the extent of saying that after 44 years of military, civilian, and mufti uniforms, then their surrogates had been in power 57 out of 66 years. No one should expect that all the perversions that they brought into public policy and into public life will erase within 3 years. President Bola Tinubu, in the last 2.5, 3 years, from my own understanding and from what I can see, has played a yeoman job to see what he could do. For example, the crisis of insecurity. Militaries were in power. When General Obasanjo was president as a civilian, the man in Zamfara created Sharia and 11 others joined him. We told them that was in confrontation with Section 10 of the Constitution. He said it was political Sharia. It will soon fade out. That was what developed into what we now are faced with. Bandits, herders, having AK-47 and the likes. And the Sahelian region overhead Nigeria, there are no green there any longer. So these guys are here. They were brought here by people who want to capture power. And after using them, they want them to return back to the Sahelian region where there's no green. And they have refused. That's why security has been a thorn in the flesh. So our current security architecture cannot provide security for us. And that is not in conformity with fundamental objectives and directive principles of state policy in Section 14, which says that the security of life and property of the people is the primary responsibility of government. Well, so I'm saying we need to reconfigure Nigeria's security. This one cannot serve our interests.
Okay. Well, on that note, I want to say thank you very much indeed. It's been, to say the least, illuminating talking with you. Chief Ayo Opadokun is the author, veteran activist, and General Secretary of the National Democratic Coalition, and he is the author of the new book, The Gun Hegemony. He was talking to me on the line there from Lagos.